Okay, everyone, good evening. Uh, each time I go on, we have some technical difficulties, but that's the way it is. So tonight's class is on Haggadah Pesach. Last week, we had our first Haggadah Pesach class last Tuesday night. It was not on this live stream. I had done it on a free conference call. But now we're here on the live stream. And again, I thank Lev Novakov for setting this all up. And let's begin. So we're going to discuss the section of the Haggadah. After the Manishtana, we have three paragraphs. We have the paragraph of Avodim Hayinu. We have the paragraph of Maaseh Reb Eliezer Yeshua, the story of the five sages that we're talking about, the exodus from Egypt the whole night. And then we have the next paragraph of Amar Reb Eliezer ben Azariah, the paragraph of Reb Eliezer ben Azariah's teaching, saying. And that's what we're going to focus on. So let's read it together and translate. And this is actually part of the Mishnah in Masechta Brachas and Mishnayos Brachas. And it reads, Amar Eliezer ben Azariah, the sage Reb Eliezer ben Azariah said, Harei ani keven shivim shana, I am like 70 years old. The Talmud tells us he was not 70 years old then. He was actually 18 years old, but he made this statement, I'm like a 70-year-old man. I'm not going to get into that right now. And I did not merit, meaning I was not able to win over my colleagues regarding mentioning the exodus from Egypt at night. Now, when we read the Shema, we have three paragraphs of Shema. The third paragraph, which is the paragraph about the mitzvah tzitzis, actually concludes with a verse that reads, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God, Asher Hitzeisi Eschem Eretz Mitzrayim, I take you out from the land of Egypt, Liyois Lochem Lelokim, to be for you as God, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God. The reason why we have that third paragraph is for that last verse. That last verse is how we fulfill a mitzvah called Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, remembering the exodus from Egypt. Every day we have a mitzvah to remember the exodus from Egypt. We have a mitzvah on the Seder night to recount the whole story of the exodus from Egypt. And all year round, every day, we have a mitzvah of mentioning, of remembering the fact that we left Egypt. And what we have, and we fulfill that mitzvah by saying the third paragraph of Shema. And we said that last verse that it says, I am Hashem your God who took you out from Egypt. And that is how we fulfill the mitzvah every day of remembering, mentioning the exodus from Egypt. The question that this Mishnah that we're reading in the Haggadah has is as to whether that mitzvah to remember the exodus from Egypt is a mitzvah only during the day or even at night, which really means if you hold that the mitzvah to remember the exodus from Egypt every day is by night and by day, then when you say Shema, you say the third paragraph at night and by day. If you hold that it's only a mitzvah by day, then when saying Shema, you only say the third paragraph by day. So that's the discussion here. That's the argument here between Reb Eliezer ben Azariah and his colleagues, as we're going to read. I'm reading off my computer. That's why I'm looking upwards. So that's the discussion here. So Amar Reb Eliezer ben Azariah, Reb Eliezer ben Azariah said, I'm like 70 years old. I was not able to convince my colleagues that we should be mentioning the exit from Egypt by night. Ashadrasha ben Zoma, until the sage Ben Zoma came and was able to deduce this from the wording of the Torah. Shenema, as it states, that you shall remember the day you left the land of Egypt, all the days of your life. So why does the Torah say all the days of your life? It could have said the days of your life. And therefore, Ben Zoma extrapolated from that, if the Torah will only say the words, the days of your life, that would mean the days, daytime. Kol Yemei Chayecha, that extra word, all, means Halelas comes to include even by night. The Chachamim say they still disagree. There is no mitzvah to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim at night. And they explain the extra word kol differently. The words days of your life imply the lifetime of this world. All the days of your life, loving the Mesa Mashiach are coming to include, and even when Mashiach comes, we'll still be mentioning and remembering the Exodus from Egypt. But that's the argument here. The argument here in the Mishnah is an argument as to whether we have a mitzvah by daytime. For sure, we have a mitzvah to remember and to mention the Exodus from Egypt. The question is, do we also have it at night? So the question that all the commentaries ask is, why are you mentioning this here? This Mishnah has to do with something that we do every single night of the year. It has nothing to do with what we do tonight, what we do on the Seder night. The Seder night is its own mitzvah. It's called Sipar Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. That's the mitzvah of the night. The mitzvah every day is to remember the fact that we left from Egypt. Why are we bringing this in here? It's not seemingly relevant to what we're doing tonight. It's a separate mitzvah. So why are we mentioning it? Just because it's similar, it relates? So the commentary called Ma'aseh Nisim explains in the following way, and in a very fundamental way. But it begins with a question. And this question begins with the fact that even according to the sages who say there's no mitzvah of mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim by night, but they do agree that on the Seder night, we have a mitzvah to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And if you look in the Gemara in Brachas explains that the argument between the Chachamim, the sages, and Elazar ben Azariah really revolves around the events that took place when we left Egypt. According to all opinions, what happened starting the night of Pesach, when we left Egypt, is the following. On the night of the 15th of the month of Nisan, on that night, at midnight, the firstborn of the Egypt were smitten. They died. And when that happened, Pharaoh came to the Jewish people, came to Moshe, and he told them, you're free. You can leave. Get out. The Jewish people, though, did not actually leave Egypt until the next day. So the Pharaoh freed them. Pharaoh told them to leave on the night of the 15th. Didn't actually leave, though, until the 15th. So the question is, when we talk about Geula, when we talk about the redemption of the Jewish people, when we're supposed to be remembering the Exodus from Egypt, when did that redemption really take place? Did it take place at night, or at least start at night and finish by day? Or do we just look at the redemption taking place by day when they actually left? It's true, the miracle of the smiting of the firstborn took place on the night. Pharaoh came and told us to leave at night. It actually been till the day. And therefore, what happened at night is insignificant. It's insignificant in regard to remembering the redemption from Egypt. That is what the Gemara says is the argument between the Chachamim and Elazar ben Azariah. The Chachamim who say we don't mention the Exodus of Egypt at night, they're of the opinion that Geula Me'urta, that means, that's the wording of the Gemara, that means the redemption took place by day. What happened by night is insignificant. And therefore, we don't remember. We don't mention the Exodus from Egypt at night. According to Elazar ben Azariah, no, the redemption began at night, and therefore we mention the Exodus from Egypt at night. That is how the Gemara explains their argument. So therefore, the Ma'aseh Nisim asks that if Chachamim are of the opinion that we only remember, that our daily obligation to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim is only by day, because by day is when they actually left, and that's when we consider them redeemed, and before that, not. So then, why on the Seder night do we have a mitzvah, according to everybody, to retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt at night? Why do they, if the redemption didn't really happen at night, then why do we have a mitzvah to tell the story of the redemption at night? We should do it by day and not by night. How do we understand why the mitzvah of Pesach is and telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, that we have at night? But the daily obligation all year round of remembering the Exodus from Egypt, that's only in the morning. How do we understand that? And therefore, the Ma'aseh Nisim continues his explanation. with another question, or trying to understand something else. And that is, every single day we have a mitzvah to talk about the exodus from Egypt. Now, Hashem has done many miracles for us after the exodus from Egypt, many miracles. And the fact that we daily only talk about one of those miracles, the exodus from Egypt, says the Masanisim is actually shortchanging God of the praise that he deserves. He says, imagine if there was a person who took in an orphan, took in a person who was homeless. And the person who took this homeless person in gave him to eat and gave him to drink and gave him clothing. And every single day he gave him something new. And then this homeless person tells other people, every time he meets someone and he talks about what this person who took him into his house does for him, all he mentions is, he fed me. Doesn't mention anything else. The only thing he mentions every time he meets someone is, he fed me. So the person who took him in would get very upset. Why are you only thanking and praising me for the fact that I fed you? What about all the other things that I did for you? So the same thing should be problematic when it comes to the fact that every single day we talk about the miracle of the exodus from Egypt. We talk about that salvation that we experienced, but there are many more experiences, salvations and miracles that God did for us. So the fact that we just keep repeating the same one all the time would seemingly be minimizing what Hashem has done for us. Now, if we talking about the exodus from Egypt on Pesach night, on the Seder night, the 50th at night, that's not such a problem because it's the anniversary. It's the anniversary of when we left. The same way, says the Masanisim, every year on Purim, when the miracle of Purim happened, we talk about and thank Hashem for that miracle of Purim. So it makes all the sense that on the date of leaving Egypt, we talk about the miracles of Egypt and we thank him for it. And we do it at night because that's the beginning, that's when the day begins, that's when the anniversary begins. But at the same time, when we're going ahead and every day mentioning again and again the same miracle, the same kindness over the same one, and not mentioning the other ones, we're either giving the impression that this is the most important miracle God did for us, and who are we to say that? Or we're minimizing the praise that he deserves for all the miracles that he's done for us. So how do we understand this mitzvah of every single day mentioning over and over again the same miracle, the same kindness Hashem did for us, of taking us out of Egypt, of freeing us from bondage? Says the Masanisim that what must be is that whenever we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, remember we talk about the Exodus from Egypt? What we're not just talking about celebrating a miracle and thanking him for a kindness that he did for us, thanking him for his salvation he did for us. But rather, the essence of leaving Egypt is that at that point of time when Hashem did that, he made us his chosen people. He made us his nation. He made us his children. That is what Yetzias Mitzrayim did. And that is what we are to primarily keep in mind. When we think about the Exodus from Egypt, what our focus is not just a kindness, a salvation, but rather the fact that he made us his people. And actually, because of the fact, the question before was, why aren't we mentioning all the other miracles every day that Hashem does? If we only mention the same one over and over again, we are minimizing his praise. The answer is, it's not about thanking him for kindnesses that he's done for us. It's about focusing on the fact that he made us his people and he made us his children. And because of that, all the other miracles and salvations that we've ever experienced come because of that. And we'll explain that soon in a second. So when we are, if the question was, why are we thanking him for one of his kindness, one of his salvations? That's not what we're doing. We're thanking him for making us his people. And because he made us his people, that is why all the other miracles are possible. And the fact that he made us his people, that in itself is the greatest kindness that he could do for us, that really does surpass anything else. So let's now focus on. So if the question was that if we only talk about the exodus from Egypt, so we're only thanking Hashem for that salvation. What about the other salvations that we thank Him for? The reason why we have this focus on Yetzias Mitzrayim every single day is because we are thanking Hashem for the fact that He made us His people. And because He made us His people, His nation, His family, that is why all the other miracles and salvations we've ever experienced are possible. And in order to understand that and appreciate that more, I have to go back to something I actually mentioned last week, again from the Maaseh Nisim's commentary. And this was from his commentary on the paragraph of Avodim Hayinu. They were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. And in that paragraph, we say, Avodim Hayinu LaPharaoh Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. V'yitzenu Hashem Elokeinu misham. And Hashem our God took us out from there. B'yad chazaka. With a strong hand. When Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, He took us out in a very open, public, miraculous way. And the Maaseh Nisim asks, why is that important for us to know? Why is it important for us to talk about that He did it b'yad chazaka, with a strong hand? And he explains that the fact that Hashem, if Hashem wanted to, He could have taken us out of Egypt in a very quiet way. He could have put in the hearts of the Egyptians to decide, it's not right to hold the people like this. They should be free. It's not right to enslave human beings. They should be free. He could have made them do that. But He intentionally did not do it that way. He rather did it in an open, miraculous way. In a way that was clear to everyone that He was taking out the Jewish people, and not just taking them out, but making them His chosen nation, His people, His family. That was the purpose of taking us out with open miracles for everyone to see and to know and to recognize. Not just that He did miracles for us, but that He did those miracles to make us His people. Now that, says the Maaseh Nisim, actually is what guarantees our eternity. The fact that Hashem took us out of Egypt in a way that everybody recognizes that we are His people is what has saved us and will save us from the Gullus for all generations. And he explains it in the following way. We know that when the Jewish people sinned after the golden calf, and after they sinned by the spies, and Hashem wanted to destroy the Jewish people, and Moshe had to pray on their behalf, the argument that Moshe Rabbeinu made to Hashem was that although the Jewish people are not worthy of being saved, if you kill them, that will desecrate your name. Egypt, not just Egypt represents the whole world, will say, look, He took them out of Egypt, but He can't bring them into the land of Canaan, and therefore He's killing them. That's a chilul Hashem. That's a desecration of Hashem's name. And as the Maaseh Nisim explains, that the desecration of Hashem's name is not just, well, He did all these miracles and then He killed them. Because perhaps from that point, if they become unworthy, they're not worthy. But it was understood by everybody. Everybody saw that He took them out to make them His people, to make them His family. And when it comes out that He kills them afterwards, that's a desecration of Hashem's name. He went ahead and He acquired His people, He made them His family, and then He destroyed them. That is a chilul Hashem. That desecrates Hashem's name. It was that argument by which Moshe was able to convince Hashem to forgive the Jewish people. And that although they weren't worthy of surviving, that's why they survived. And that, says the Nesiva, the Maaseh Nisim, is how we will survive in Gullus and eventually be redeemed through Mashiach. Because as long as we are suffering in exile, the world recognizes who the Jewish people are. The world recognizes that we are the people that He did miracles for and that we are His chosen people. And if it comes out that we are suffering and that we're downtrodden, then that desecrates His name. And that will be, at the end of the day, that will be what will redeem us. Because as we go through exile, we will not be worthy of redemption. But the reason why Hashem at the end will redeem us is to prevent the desecration of His name. So it comes out that the fact that Hashem took us out, biyad chazak, Hashem took us out with an open and outstretched hand, with a strong hand, an outstretched arm that we mentioned, that's mentioned in the Torah. All that was to make it very clear to the world that we are His people, we are His children, and that was how Hashem would guarantee that we will survive, that we will be redeemed, and that we will again, it will be clear again to the world that we are His people. That was the kindness that He did for us. So the Yad Chazaka, the exodus from Egypt, making us His people, and everybody knowing that, that is what guarantees our survival and our eventual ultimate redemption. So now, if that is what Yetzias Mitzrayim is primarily about, so let's now look back. Let's not try to answer the other question that the Mas and Nisim had. Let's see how he answers why there is a difference between Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt at night, and our mitzvah every day of a mention in Mitzrayim. The question was that according to the sages say that we only mention Yetzias Mitzrayim every day in the daytime. And the Gemara says, why is that? Because the redemption was by the day. So says the Nesivos, what that means is like this. What that means is that since every day when we remember Yetzias Mitzrayim, the point is to remember how He took us as a people. And because He took us as His people and as His children, that is why we survive. That is how we last. That's why we're able to exist, even with all our shortcomings. So according to the Chachamim, they say, do you know when that happened? Do you know when it took place that we became His people? By day, because that's when we actually left Egypt. It was only when we actually left Egypt by day, that's when we were redeemed, and that's when we became His people. And therefore, the sages say, Yetzias Mitzrayim, the daily Yetzias Mitzrayim, we mention it, we only have a mitzvah to do that by day, because that's when we became His people. And that's what we're supposed to be remembering every day when we remember the Exodus from Egypt. On the Seder night, that's the anniversary of leaving Egypt. On the anniversary, it makes sense. You talk about what happened then, just like you talk about on Purim, what happened in Purim. But when it comes to the full picture and the full intent and the full understanding of Yetzias Mitzrayim that we have to remember every day, which is how we made us His people, that's only by day, because that only happened by day. But according to Ben Zoma, when it says that we do it by night, then that means that we became redeemed at night. Since the process started at night, already at night we began becoming His people. And therefore at night we have a mitzvah to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim every night, because at night is when we at least started becoming His people. And therefore night is the appropriate time to remember the Exodus from Egypt, because it was at that point of the day that we became His people. Now that means, according to therefore, what comes out is like this. The original question also was, why are we bringing this in here? Why are we talking about the daily miracle, the daily mentioning of Yetzias Mitzrayim, when tonight's a different mitzvah? The answer is because understanding the daily mitzvah, which we asked before, why do we keep mentioning only one of Hashem's miracles for us every single day when there are so many more? And the answer is because we're not just celebrating, remembering a miracle of salvation, but rather we are focusing on how He made us His people. That's why there's no problem mentioning it every single day. Now that we have that principle, now that we have that concept, so now we look at the argument between the Chacham and Eliezer and Azariah, and we say, okay, when did that happen? By day or by night? Ben Zoma says it started and already began at night that we became His people. And that is the opinion that we follow. In practical halacha, in Jewish practice, we say the third paragraph of Shema at night because we have a mitzvah at night to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Why? Because it's at night we became His people. And that is where we now see that because we follow the opinion, because we follow the opinion of Ben Zoma, that we mention Yetzias Mitzrayim at night. That means at night already we became his people. That helps us now gain insight into the mitzvah of Sipur. The mitzvah that we have in the Seder night of telling the whole story is the same idea. The redemption began at night. We started becoming his people at the night of the 15th of Nisan. When Paro told us that we can leave, that's already when we started becoming his people. Which means that the Seder night we have to be remembering and bearing in mind what we were supposed to be bearing in mind every night, which is how Yetzias Mitzrayim, exit from Egypt, is about remembering and focusing on the fact that he made us his people, his children. We gain that insight from the discussion of the daily mitzvah of remembering the exit from Egypt. But through that discussion, we now gain the insight of what Yetzias Mitzrayim is about, and that Yetzias Mitzrayim, if we mention it at night, means at night already that process began making us his people. And therefore, on the Seder night, that's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be doing that too. We have to remember that also. We have to bear that in mind. And actually, the Masa Nisan before explained that after Avodah Mayida comes to paragraph of the 5 sages that spoke about the exodus from Egypt all night long. So the Masa Nisan asks, what did they spend the whole night long talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim? These are wise men. They know the story already. How much time can you spend on telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, especially for such great sages? The answer is that those sages understood that the mitzvah of any mitzvah that we have, remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim, is about remembering how he made us his people. And that because he made us his people, that is why we survive through history. No matter what galus will be, and no matter what kind of suffering we'll go through, we will be redeemed along the way to the ultimate redemption of becoming a Mashiach, because he made us his people. And if we suffer, that's the creation of his name. And says the Masa Nisan, what happens on the Seder night when we talk about the exodus from Egypt, which in essence we need to back up for a second. So what is the difference, practically speaking, between the mitzvah of telling the story at night, on the Seder night, and the mitzvah to remember every day the exodus from Egypt? And the answer is, because every day we just mention the fact that Hashem took us out from Egypt. On the Seder night, we talk about it in detail, we elaborate on it. And in that elaboration, says the Masa Nisan, we have to find a way of seeing in every detail of the exodus from Egypt that we talk about on the Seder night, every one of those details have to show us the kindness that Hashem did for us by making us his people so that we can survive in all generations. On the Seder night, you have to look at all the miracles that happened when we left Egypt, and somehow or another contemplate how they affect us for all generations that we can survive. I'm not sure exactly how you do that. But that's what he said the sages were doing. The sages spent the whole night not just telling the story, but rather applying all the miracles of the Seder night to their generation, to their experiences, to their survival, and to the survival of the Jewish people for all generations. That's what the mitzvah is about. The mitzvah is about making sure that a person, understanding again, that Hashem took us out of Egypt to make us his people, that's what we're supposed to remember every day. And on the Seder night, we get into detail to understand and to try to contemplate how each detail of the exodus from Egypt contributes to our survival for all generations. This is when at the Seder, we say a whole list of Hodel Hashem ki tov ki lo mechasta. We go through all of Hashem's kindnesses and we say ki lo mechasta, for his kindness is eternal. This is a chapter from Tehillim, and it's called Hallel Haggadah, the Great Hallel. We actually say it on Shabbos in the Pesach de Zimra. We have a special mitzvah to say it at the Seder. Along with the regular Hallel that we say, we also say the Hallel Haggadah. Those words, Ki lo olam chastai, for his kindness is eternal, the Masa Nisan explains, means that every one of those kindnesses that we list in that chapter of Tehillim, we have to understand that those kindnesses were not just relevant to that generation when that event actually took place, but that every one of those events is ki la'olam chasdei, for his kindness is eternal. Every one of those kindnesses affect us eternally. And Yetzias Mitzrayim was that kind of miracle that affected us eternally. It made a difference for all of us. It made a difference in a general way, so to speak, because he made us his people. And therefore, if he doesn't redeem us, it's a desecration of Hashem's name. And on the Seder night, we have to contemplate how every aspect of the miracles in the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim affects us for all generations. Because we became his people. Yetzias Mitzrayim made us his people and guaranteed our survival. And not just the taking out contributed to that, but every detail of how that happened. We have a mitzvah to try to figure out and to contemplate how that affects us and our survival for every generation. So this is a really very important concept the Maaseh Nishim is teaching us. When we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, our focus has to be that Hashem made us his people. When he took us out of Egypt, he made us his people. And because he made us his people, that guarantees our survival for all generations, through all suffering, through all problems that we face. And eventually brings us to ultimate redemption with the coming of Mashiach. Every night in Ma'ariv we say, Hamaka bevrasei kol b'chari Mitzrayim. He smote with his anger all the firstborn of Egypt. Always forget. When I have to remember it, I forget. Can't remember the words exactly. But the point is that we say that Hashem took us out l'cheiros olam, for eternal freedom. Took us out for eternal freedom. When Hashem took us out of Egypt, he took us out for eternal freedom. L'cheiros olam. And the question is asked, what kind of eternal freedom did we gain when we left Egypt? It may be true that as a whole nation, we were never enslaved again, but we were almost destroyed as a whole nation on Purim. Spiritually, we were almost destroyed on Hanukkah. We've gone through many problems, and yes, Hashem has redeemed us. But how does that relate to the exodus from Egypt? How do we say the exodus from Egypt was a chayris elam, was an eternal freedom? It wasn't eternal freedom. It didn't help us. I mean, it helped us get out of Egypt, but we met a lot of other problems. So why are we calling the exodus from Egypt an eternal freedom that seemingly didn't necessarily help us throughout many generations? The answer we could say is, based on this Maaseh Nishim, based on what we're discussing tonight, is that since Yetzias Mitzrayim, that's from Egypt, is about making us his people, and because of that, we are guaranteed that because of that, Hashem's name is desecrated if he doesn't redeem us, then our ability to be able to survive and be redeemed over and over again until the ultimate redemption, where does it come from? It comes from leaving Egypt. Leaving Egypt can be called chayris olam, eternal freedom, because our ability to be free, our ability to get out of our suffering, our ability to get out of our problems and our troubles at the hands of our enemies or whatever danger or suffering that we face. We get out of that because we were taken out of Egypt and made his people. That's why we can call leaving Egypt chayris olam, eternal freedom. That's what we need to remember on the Seder night, and especially this year where we're all suffering. The whole world is suffering. And we have to remember that Hashem made us his people. And as his people, he will redeem us. And we'll be able to get out of this problem, be able to get back to our lives as were before. And we pray that not only through our celebrating Pesach and remembering this time every day, not only will that give us the merit to be able to get through exile and get through the sufferings of exile, that we should get to the ultimate redemption with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, Meir V'Yameinu. Amen. Thank you all for listening. Have a good night.